The morning of my college graduation, I woke up at 5 a.m. and checked my phone before I even opened my eyes all the way. Nothing from my mother. Nothing from my mother. Nothing from my father. Nothing from my brother. I told myself it was fine. I told myself they were probably already on the road. It was a 4-hour drive from Clarksburg, and the ceremony started at 10, so maybe they'd left early and just hadn't texted. My father wasn't big on texting anyway. He said it was for people who didn't have the spine to actually call. I got up and ironed my dress under my gown. I did my own hair in the bathroom mirror of the apartment I'd shared with 2 other girls for 3 years. I'd learned to do everything myself in this apartment. Fix the garbage disposal, file my own taxes, negotiate with the landlord when the heat went out in February. I'd stopped waiting for my parents to show up for things a long time before that morning. But graduation felt different. I thought graduation would be the thing that finally made my father look at me the way he looked at my brother. My brother, who had dropped out of community college after 1 semester. My brother, who still lived in my parents' basement at 24 and called my father the bank. My brother, who my father described as finding his footing with a patience he had never once extended to me. I called my mother at 7:30. She picked up on the 3rd ring and I could hear the television in the background. Game show. The volume was high, the way it always was when my father was still asleep. "We're not going to make it, sweetheart," she said. Just like that. The way you tell someone the restaurant is closed. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was standing at the window of my apartment watching the parking lot, watching a squirrel on the dumpster, watching anything except my own reflection. "Your father's back is bad," she said. "He can't sit in the car for 4 hours." My father's back had been bad for 3 years. It was bad when it was convenient and fine when it wasn't. It was bad the Christmas I didn't come home because I had finals. It was fine when he drove 6 hours to watch my brother play in a recreational softball tournament the previous July. "Okay," I said. "You understand, don't you? It's not that we're not proud." I told her I understood. I told her I had to go finish getting ready. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed in my ironed dress and my graduation gown, and I let myself have about 4 minutes of feeling like I was 12 years old again. Then I stood up, put on my shoes, and drove myself to the stadium. I walked across that stage alone. I shook the dean's hand. I tucked my diploma in a leather folder embossed with the university seal. When I looked out at the seats, I found my 2 roommates in the crowd. They'd come even though their own families were there, even though they had 100 other things to do, and they were standing and screaming and waving a sign they'd made out of cardboard and a Sharpie. That was the first time I cried that day, not from sadness, from something else. The particular feeling of realizing where your family actually is. I moved to Charlotte 3 weeks after graduation. I'd taken a job with a civil engineering firm, entry-level, but with a real salary and benefits and a 401k that I started contributing to on my first paycheck, because I had read enough to know that compound interest was the closest thing to a time machine. I found an apartment I could afford. I bought a used couch from a Facebook marketplace listing and carried it up 2 flights of stairs with my neighbor, a retired teacher named Mr. Okafor, who insisted on helping and then stayed for coffee. I called my parents when I got settled. My mother asked if I'd found a church. My father asked if the firm had good job security, which I knew meant he was wondering if I'd need to borrow money. I told them I was fine. I told them the city was nice. I told them I'd visit for Thanksgiving. For the first 2 years, things were quiet. I went home twice a year. I brought wine and helped with dishes and smiled through dinners where my father talked about my brother's new business idea. It changed every time I visited. Something about dropshipping, then something about rental properties, then something about a food truck, and never once asked about my work. I had started managing a project on my own. A pedestrian bridge over a creek in a park. Small, but mine. I mentioned it once. My father said, "That sounds complicated," and changed the subject back to my brother. I stopped mentioning work after that. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was in my car in the parking garage at work, eating a granola bar because I'd forgotten to eat lunch, when my mother called. "Your brother's getting married," she said, and there was something in her voice I recognized, not excitement. The voice she used when she was delivering news she already knew I wouldn't like. "That's great," I said, and I meant it, mostly. "The wedding is in June. They want to do it at the vineyard outside Clarksburg, the nice one on Route 7. I knew the vineyard. I knew what it cost. I'd looked it up once for a work event before finding somewhere cheaper. Your father and I were hoping you might be able to contribute," she said. "The two of them are just getting started, and the venue alone is, how much?" There was a pause. 11,000. I took one very slow breath. "Mom, that's not all of it. We're not asking for all of it. Maybe 3, or, Mom." I stopped. I thought about the bridge. I thought about my apartment with the couch I'd carried up 2 flights. I thought about the graduation morning and the game show loud in the background. "I'll think about it." She took that as a yes. I could hear it in the way she exhaled. I didn't say yes. I thought about it the way I said I would, carefully and honestly, and what I thought was, my brother had never paid for a single thing in his life. What I thought was, they hadn't come to my graduation. What I thought was, I had never asked them for $1 since the day I left for college, and not once had either of them offered. I called my mother back 3 days later. "I'm not going to be able to contribute to the wedding," I said. "I wish them well. I'll be there and I'll bring a gift." The silence on the other end was the kind that has a shape. "Your father is going to be very disappointed," she said. "I know. He's done a lot for you." I let that one sit there. I didn't argue with it because arguing with it would have taken the rest of the evening and accomplished nothing. I said I was sorry, and I said I hoped they had a beautiful wedding, and I hung up. My father called me himself 2 days later. I hadn't heard his voice in 4 months. "I need you to explain something to me," he said, without saying hello. This was how he always started difficult conversations, as if you owed him an explanation before he'd even told you what he wanted to know. "What's that?" I said. "Why you think it's acceptable to refuse to help your family." "Dad, your brother needs you. This wedding is important to this family. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is your family we're talking about." I was standing in my kitchen. I had a dish towel in my hand. I looked at it for a moment. "Dad, I didn't go to your family with my hand out when I graduated," I said. "I didn't ask for help with my rent or my student loans. I didn't ask for anything, and nobody came to my graduation." Dead air. "Your mother explained about my back. Your back was fine when you drove to watch him play softball." More dead air. Different kind. "I see," he said finally. His voice had changed, gone flat and careful the way it did when he was deciding something. "I see how it is." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen holding the dish towel for a long time. My brother got married in June. I went. I wore a blue dress and brought a stand mixer as a gift, and watched my father walk my brother's now wife down a portion of the aisle because her own father was out of the picture, and I watched my father cry, actually cry, which I had seen exactly twice in my life before that, and something in my chest did a complicated thing that I still don't have the right word for. I hugged my brother. I told him she was wonderful. She was, actually. I liked her. None of this was her fault. I drove home alone that evening. I called my partner Dominic when I was on the highway, and he asked how it was, and I said, "It was fine," and I meant it the way. You mean fine when you've made peace with something, and the peace cost you. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a certified letter. I don't mean a letter in the mail, I mean a certified, legal letter, signature required, delivered by a postal carrier who asked me 3 times if I was sure I wanted to accept it. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I read. My father was claiming that I had stolen from him. He had written, with the help of what appeared to be a very inexpensive notary service, a formal letter stating that during my time at home over the years, I had removed items of personal and financial value from the family home without permission, and that he was exploring legal options to recover these assets. The items he listed were a cast iron skillet, a set of measuring cups, a box of my own childhood photographs, a quilt my grandmother had made and given directly to me on my 16th birthday, with my name embroidered on the backing. I read that letter 3 times. Each time I reached the quilt, I had to put it down. Dominic read it when he came over that evening. He sat at the table and read it without saying anything, and when he finished, he put it down and looked at me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I had been thinking about this since the letter arrived. I had the quilt. I had a photograph of me at 16 holding it, my grandmother beside me, both of us smiling. I had a handwritten card from my grandmother that said, explicitly, "For my sweet girl, yours to keep always." "I'm going to respond," I said, in writing. My response was 2 pages. I included photographs. I included a copy of my grandmother's card. I included a copy of my college diploma because I wanted it in writing somewhere, for myself as much as for them, that I had done this. I had done all of this. I had been 22 years old and alone in a stadium, and I had walked across that stage by myself, and every single thing in my apartment I had earned. I mailed it certified mail. Signature required. Then I called my grandmother. My grandmother was 79 and lived in a condo in Sarasota and had more clarity than anyone I knew. I told her about the letter. I told her about the quilt. She was quiet for a moment, the way she got when she was angry but choosing her words. "That quilt has your name on it," she said. "So, Nian, you can't argue with thread." She called my father herself that afternoon. I don't know exactly what she said. I know that she and my father did not speak again for several months after that. I did not hear from my parents for 6 weeks. Then my mother called on a Sunday morning. Not about the letter, not about the quilt. About my father. "He's in the hospital," she said. "His heart." I drove to Clarksburg that afternoon. Dominic came with me. He drove the whole way and didn't ask me to explain anything I wasn't ready to explain, which was one of the things I had learned about him that mattered most. My father was in a room on the 3rd floor with tubes in his arm and a monitor beside the bed. He looked smaller than I remembered. My father had always been a large man in the way that had nothing to do with physical size. Loud opinions, heavy silences, a presence that rearranged the air in a room. In a hospital bed, he was just a person. Older than I'd let myself notice. He looked at me when I walked in. He looked at Dominic. He looked back at me. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," I said. I sat in the chair beside the bed. Dominic found the waiting room. My mother went to get coffee, and for the first time and longer than I could remember, it was just me and my father, and all the things we hadn't said were in the room with us, taking up more space than either of us. "The letter was wrong," he said finally, not looking at me, looking at the window. I didn't answer right away. "I know you know that," I said. He nodded. "One slow movement. Your grandmother called me." "I heard. She's..." He stopped. A small sound, not quite a laugh. "She's something." "Yeah. The quilt is yours," he said. "It was always yours." I looked at my hands. I was trying to decide what to do with all the things I felt. The anger that had been sitting in me for years, the grief that had been parked underneath it, the strange and inconvenient love that was underneath that, which had never gone anywhere no matter how much I'd wanted it to. "I didn't come for an apology," I said. "I just came because you're my father." He turned his head then. He looked at me directly, which he rarely did, and his eyes were red at the edges. "I didn't go," he said. "To your graduation. No, I should have gone. There are moments that you spend years building toward, and then they arrive and they're quieter than you thought they'd be. No music. No resolution that wraps everything up clean. Just a hospital room and a monitor beeping and a man who doesn't know how to be soft, trying to find one soft thing to say. "Yes," I said, "you should have." We sat together for another hour. We talked eventually, not about the letter, not about the money, but about small things. A documentary he'd been watching. A tree in the front yard that had finally died. My grandmother's condo, which he admitted he'd never visited, which surprised me. Dominic came back when visiting hours were ending. We said goodnight. My father looked at Dominic for a moment. "You take care of her," he said. "She mostly takes care of herself," Dominic said. "But yes, my father was in the hospital for 9 days. He had a procedure. He recovered. My mother texted me updates every morning during those 9 days, which was the most consistent communication we'd had in years. He came home. He did cardiac rehab. He was supposed to eat less red meat and walk 30 minutes a day, and my mother reported that he was doing one of those things reasonably well. Things did not become simple after that. I want to be honest about that because I think the version of the story where the hospital visit fixes everything is not the true version and not the useful one. My father and I did not suddenly become the kind of people who called each other on weekdays. We did not have the conversation where everything got explained and forgiven in the right order. He didn't come to my work to see the bridge I built, though I sent him a photograph when it opened and he texted back 2 words, "Nice work." I kept that text. Still have it. What changed was smaller than a resolution and larger than nothing. He stopped calling me when he needed something and calling it checking in. My mother stopped opening every conversation with information about my brother. When I came home for Christmas that year, my father asked me about a project I was working on, a drainage system for a new development outside Charlotte. And he listened. He didn't understand all of it, and he asked one question that revealed he thought engineering was mostly about math, which is a very common misconception, and I explained, and he nodded and asked another question. It was 20 minutes of conversation. That's all it was. But I had been waiting for 20 minutes of conversation my entire life, so I held it carefully, the way you hold something you don't want to break. Dominic asked me on the drive home if I thought things were better with my family. I looked out the window at the highway, at the dark fields going past. "Better is the wrong word," I said. "But something shifted. Is that enough?" I thought about the quilt on the end of my bed at home. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting in the card. I thought about the bridge over the creek in the park, which I sometimes drove past when I needed to remember that I had built something real. "I think so," I said. "I think it's what I've got." He reached over and took my hand, and we drove the rest of the way home in the kind of quiet that doesn't need anything added to it. I still have the certified letter. I keep it in a folder with the photographs and my grandmother's card, not because I want to stay angry. I don't, or not anymore. Not the sharp kind, but because it's part of the record. It's proof of what I survived and what I didn't let define me and what I chose to do anyway, which was show up and keep going and build things that stand. That's the whole story, or the version I can tell right now. The version where I walked across that stage alone and it was enough. The version where a certified letter and a cast iron skillet and a quilt with my name embroidered in thread became the clearest accounting of who my family was and what I was willing to hold on to. I held on to myself. I held on to myself. I held on to the quilt. That turned out to be the right call. I've thought a lot about why my father sent that letter, not the legal reasoning behind it. There wasn't any, really. The cast iron skillet, the measuring cups, a quilt with my name sewn into the backing in my grandmother's own hand. I've thought about what kind of person writes those words down, signs them, has them notarized, and sends them certified mail to their own daughter. And what I keep coming back to is this. He wasn't trying to get the quilt back. He knew the quilt was mine. He was trying to get a reaction. He was trying to remind me that he still had the ability to make my life feel uncertain. That's what controlling people do when they lose the handle. They don't come after what they actually want. They come after the thing that will cost you the most energy to defend. The thing is, I had spent years defending myself against smaller versions of the same move. The way he never came to things that mattered to me. The way every conversation eventually curved back toward my brother, toward what my brother needed, toward what I could do to help. The way his disappointment in me was always implied, never stated, which made it impossible to argue against directly. I had gotten very good over those years at absorbing that kind of pressure and not letting it knock me sideways. I didn't always do it gracefully, but I kept standing. That's what I want to say about the quilt, and about the letter, and about the whole long arc of it. Not that things worked out perfectly. They didn't, and they still aren't, and I don't think they will be, not in the way I once hoped for when I was young and still believed that a hard conversation could fix a person. What I want to say is that I kept my own record. I kept the photographs. I kept my grandmother's card with her handwriting on it. I kept the diploma and the texts and the evidence of my own life, not because I was planning to use it as ammunition, but because I understood, somewhere underneath everything, that my history was mine to hold and nobody could rewrite it without my consent. My father sat in that hospital bed and said the quilt was always mine. He said he should have come to my graduation. Those 2 sentences didn't undo 10 years, but they were true, and he said them out loud, and something in me that had been braced against the cold for a very long time let go a little. That's the thing about cause and effect when it comes to people. It isn't fast. It isn't clean. The choices we make don't come back to us in a straight line. They come back sideways, years later, in a hospital room, in a 2-word text that says, "Nice work." The way my father treated me shaped the person I became, and the person I became was someone who could sit beside him anyway and mean it, not because I owed him that, because I chose it. That's the difference. Dominic asked me once if I thought I'd turned out okay given everything. I told him I thought turning out okay was something you decided, not something that happened to you. I think that's still true. I think the quilt on my bed and the bridge over the creek and the couch I carried up 2 flights of stairs are all the same thing, which is proof that I kept going and built something real. That's what I've got. It turns out that's plenty.